The neon sign flickered outside the Rusty Anchor, a small bar perched near the Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia. It was Friday night, and the place was packed with sailors, contractors, and a handful of locals who preferred cheap beer over fine dining. Inside, the music thumped lazily from speakers overhead, mingling with the hum of chatter and the occasional clink of glasses. The smell of fried food, spilled beer, and sweat hung thick in the air. This was just another night, until Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hawley walked through the door. She didn't stand out at first glance. Jeans, a faded hoodie, her hair tied back loosely. Her posture, however, betrayed a quiet confidence. Every step measured, deliberate, betraying nothing of the intensity she carried beneath the surface. Most eyes passed over her without a second thought. After weeks of grueling training exercises with her SEAL unit, this night was meant to be simple, a chance to relax, laugh with friends, and forget about missions, pressure, and the constant weight of responsibility. Sarah navigated through the crowded space with practiced ease. Her friends, 3 fellow Navy officers, trailed close, laughing over shared jokes about drills and injuries that had nothing to do with civilian life. Sarah's mind was partly on the conversation, partly elsewhere, running quietly through her mental checklist for the next week. Logistics, drills, and the persistent thought that failure was never an option. And then, at the far end of the bar, a group of contractors caught her attention, or, more accurately, she caught their attention. They were loud, clearly drunk, slurring words and nudging each other with boisterous energy. Their eyes fell on her as she passed, sizing her up without knowing who she was. One of them, broad-shouldered and overconfident, stepped forward with a smirk. "Hey, watch it, sweetheart," he said, blocking her path. His words were coated with mockery, arrogance, and the kind of bravado only fueled by alcohol. Sarah paused, not out of fear, but out of control. She didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice. Her eyes scanned them calmly, noting body language, spacing, and potential threats, reflexes honed over years of training. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her tone neutral, simple, polite. The man ignored her. He leaned forward slightly, a challenge in his posture. His friends laughed. Then, with an almost instinctive cruelty born from overconfidence, he elbowed her squarely in the face. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. Music, chatter, laughter, all muted, as if someone had pulled a cord and stopped time. Sarah's lips split, blood trickling down as she blinked once, and tilted her head, assessing. There was no flinch, no visible reaction. She didn't scream, she didn't shout. She just stood there, calm, letting the moment stretch. Her friends froze behind her, unsure if they should intervene. A hush spread across nearby tables. Some watched, half amused, half concerned. The contractors, emboldened by perceived weakness, laughed again, thinking she would fold. They were wrong. Sarah took a single measured step forward. The kind of step that belongs to someone who has faced life or death situations, so often that they can weigh risk in milliseconds. And in that instant, everything shifted. One of the men, the one who elbowed her, made the mistake of lunging forward to shove her again. That was all it took. Sarah's body moved before the brain processed it. Muscle memory, training, reflexes honed through countless drills and actual combat situations, activated with deadly precision. In a single fluid motion, she grabbed his wrist, twisted, and leveraged his own momentum to send him crashing into the corner of a table. The chairs toppled. Glasses shattered. The sound was deafening in the stunned silence. Another man, attempting to help his friend, charged. Sarah ducked low, her elbow connecting sharply with his midsection. He crumpled to the ground with a grunt. She rotated smoothly, pinning a third with a controlled wrist lock. Not a punch thrown in anger, each movement deliberate, precise, efficient. The entire bar watched in disbelief. 3 grown men were down, groaning and sprawled across the floor, while Sarah remained standing, calm and controlled. Her hoodie was slightly stained with her own blood, her lip bleeding, but her posture radiated dominance and unshakable authority. The bartender, a man in his 50s with tattoos hinting at a past military life, whispered under his breath, "That's SEAL training." His words barely carried above the stunned silence. The contractors, now terrified and bewildered, scrambled to retreat, brushing past tables and chairs. One of them tried to speak, but no words came out. They had underestimated her, and it had been their first and gravest mistake. Sarah's friends, once unsure, stepped forward, helping stabilize the tables and quietly instructing the bystanders to stay back. No one moved to help her assailants. Nobody dared. It wasn't anger on her face. It was authority. And in that bar, authority had a physical weight. Minutes later, when the adrenaline began to subside, Sarah wiped her bleeding lip with a napkin and straightened her hoodie. Her friends exchanged looks of disbelief. "You okay?" one asked. She nodded, calm. "Fine." Behind her, a young sailor muttered, "You idiots just hit a Navy SEAL." The words barely left his mouth before the reality of the situation sank in for everyone in the room. It wasn't just the calm precision, the skill, or the control. It was the history, the years of training, the hidden dangers of someone who had survived Hell Week, Afghanistan missions, and countless life or death scenarios. For Sarah, it was just another day in control. She didn't revel in the fight. She didn't gloat. She had done what she had to do, and that was all. Her mind, already running through her next steps, noted the police might arrive soon, the security footage, the potential paperwork. But she didn't panic. She never did. The bar slowly returned to life, glasses clinking, murmurs of disbelief rippling through the crowd. But something lingered, invisible yet palpable, respect. Not the kind granted by medals or promotions, but the kind that came from witnessing raw skill combined with unshakable composure. Sarah Hawley walked toward the bar to grab a water, her friends trailing silently behind. She didn't smile, didn't taunt, didn't allow herself a moment of satisfaction. In her world, such things were fleeting distractions. She had survived worse. This was minor. And yet, unbeknownst to the contractors still nursing bruises and egos, they had just learned a lesson that would never leave them. Never underestimate quiet strength. That night would ripple through the base. Tales of a woman who could drop 3 men in seconds would circulate quietly among sailors and officers. Some would embellish it, some would marvel at her calm demeanor. Sarah herself would remain in the background, uninterested in fame, uninterested in glory. She didn't need the attention. She needed purpose, control, and mastery over herself and her environment. And as the neon lights flickered through the bar windows, reflecting off spilled beer and shattered glass, one thought lingered in the minds of those who had dared to challenge her. Striking a Navy SEAL wasn't a mistake you survived. It was a mistake you lived to regret. The bar was still buzzing from the sudden silence. Glasses clinked awkwardly, and a few brave patrons whispered to each other, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. But the contractors, drunk and arrogant, were already regrouping. They assumed the fight was over, that the woman they had just elbowed would cower, apologize, or flee. They were wrong. Sarah Hale's lips still bled lightly, but her expression remained calm, almost serene. She blinked slowly, her eyes scanning each of the men in front of her. Every shift in weight, every micro-movement, every tense muscle was recorded in her mind, assessed for threat level. Reflexes honed through years of grueling Navy SEAL training kicked in. She wasn't going to react emotionally. She was going to react efficiently. The first man, emboldened by the absence of immediate resistance, shoved a chair toward her. A weak attempt to intimidate, but Sarah was already calculating angles, momentum, and leverage. She moved before he could register her intention. One fluid motion. She sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted sharply. His shoulder screamed as the joint locked painfully, and before he could scream, she leveraged his body and slammed him into the corner of a table. The table shuddered, then collapsed entirely under the impact. Beer spilled across the floor, soaking shoes and furniture. A bar stool rolled across the room, hitting another contractor squarely in the shin. He yelped and stumbled, trying to regain balance. Sarah pivoted smoothly, her eyes never leaving him. Precision, control, efficiency. This was muscle memory at its finest. The second man made a mistake many people make. He lunged at her, thinking overwhelming strength would intimidate her. His timing was poor, his angle worse. Sarah ducked low, almost in slow motion, and her elbow shot out like a piston. It struck him in the midsection, forcing the air from his lungs. He doubled over, groaning and staggering back. Before he could recover, she spun and engaged the third man. Unlike the others, he hesitated, unsure of whether to attack or retreat. That pause was all she needed. In a single seamless move, she applied a joint lock, forcing him to the floor and immobilizing him without causing permanent damage. The bar was completely silent now. The only sounds were the groans of the fallen, the distant hum of the jukebox, and the slight hiss of air escaping the elbows and shoulders that had been twisted just seconds ago. No one dared to intervene. Patrons leaned back from their tables, unsure whether they were witnessing a fight or a demonstration of some secret martial art. Even Sarah's friends froze for a moment, half in awe, half in disbelief. They had trained with her, laughed with her, but this display of lethal calm was beyond anything they had imagined in civilian life. They whispered to each other, awed. She didn't even sweat. The bartender, who had been wiping down tables cautiously, muttered under his breath, "That's SEAL training." His voice carried barely above a whisper, but it was enough to make a few of the onlookers freeze in recognition. For those who had served, it was unmistakable. This was no ordinary fight. Meanwhile, the contractors were scrambling. One tried to get up, only to find his balance betrayed by panic and bruised ribs. Another attempted to speak, but words failed him. Their arrogance, drunk confidence, and underestimation of Sarah had evaporated entirely in less than 10 seconds. They were terrified. Yet Sarah remained calm, composed, almost eerily so. There was no anger on her face, no gloating, no hint of triumph. Her breathing was steady, controlled. She wasn't fighting because she enjoyed it. She was enforcing discipline, enforcing consequence. In her world, respect was earned through capability, not bluster. Minutes stretched like hours. Patrons whispered in hushed tones, some filming discreetly on phones, though no one dared come closer. Sarah's friends moved quietly to block bystanders from interfering, their faces a mixture of pride and anxiety. They understood the raw danger of misjudging A.L. firsthand. The moment crystallized when one of the fallen contractors managed to croak, "You? You're a Navy SEAL, aren't you?" The words hung in the air, absurdly understated. It wasn't a declaration. It was a desperate realization of the magnitude of their mistake. The bar, previously filled with casual drunken chatter, collectively held its breath. Sarah didn't respond verbally. She only adjusted her stance, wiped a thin trail of blood from her lip, and glanced at her friends as if to say, "Let's go." Her presence, authority, and lethal calm communicated more than any words ever could. The room seemed to shrink around her. The contractors, now fully aware of the consequences of their actions, slowly retreated to the far corner of the room, nursing bruises, shame, and ego wounds that would take far longer to heal than the physical ones. The lesson had been delivered in silence, with lethal precision, and it would be remembered forever. It wasn't just the physical defeat that stunned them. It was the sheer efficiency, control, and calm Sarah exhibited under sudden threat. Every SEAL she trained alongside would recognize the hallmark of someone who had survived Hell Week, who had led teams under fire in Afghanistan, who had carried wounded commanders across dangerous terrain. This was a professional's response, measured and deadly, but never cruel. The patrons, initially frozen, slowly began to murmur, some in awe, some in fear. A few whispered to each other, "Did she just take down 3 men that fast?" The bartender shook his head, muttering, "I've seen Navy SEALs in action. That's exactly what this looks like." By the time the adrenaline faded, police sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Security footage had already been reviewed by staff. Patrons had given their statements, and Sarah calmly recounted her version of events. She hadn't started the fight, but she had ended it, and she had done so without losing control, without letting emotion dictate her actions. Her friends guided her toward a corner table, offering napkins and water. She accepted neither with dramatic flair nor complaint. She simply applied them, straightened her hoodie, and sat. The room slowly returned to its previous rhythm, though the whispers of the incident lingered. Every glance now carried a mixture of curiosity, fear, and deep respect. Outside, the night air was cool, salty from the nearby Atlantic. Sarah leaned against the bar's doorway for a moment, letting the sounds of the ocean mix with the fading chaos inside. She didn't relish the fight. She didn't care about the attention. She cared about control, discipline, and purpose. Unbeknownst to the contractors, they had been taught an indelible lesson. Respect was not something granted lightly, and underestimating someone, especially a Navy SEAL, could cost more than just pride. It could cost dignity, security, and confidence in ways that last far longer than any bruise. And as the neon sign flickered over her hooded head, casting shadows across her calm face, one fact was undeniable. Hitting a Navy SEAL, even by accident, was a mistake you would not live down. Sarah Hawley had entered the bar looking for a night of quiet, camaraderie, and relaxation. She left it, in the eyes of many, a living lesson in calm, controlled strength, the kind that doesn't shout, it commands. And in the seconds it took her to react, 3 men learned what it truly meant to misjudge a warrior. By the time the police arrived at the Rusty Anchor, the chaos had already settled into a tense, uneasy calm. Sarah Hawley and her friends were seated at a corner booth, quietly answering questions. Her lip was still bleeding, but her composure remained unshaken. Every movement, every word, carried precision and authority, traits honed through years of training, discipline, and battlefield experience. The contractors, meanwhile, sat across the room, bruised and humiliated, aware now that they had faced someone far beyond their comprehension. The officers on the scene were initially wary. 3 men down, 1 woman standing unharmed, the scene scattered with broken tables, spilled beer, and shattered glass. They approached Sarah cautiously. "Can you explain what happened?" one asked, notebook in hand. She nodded calmly, reciting the facts with clear, deliberate phrasing. No embellishments. No anger. She simply stated what had happened and why she acted as she did. Meanwhile, the contractors attempted their own accounts, fragmented, nervous, inconsistent. The more they spoke, the more evident it became that they had overstepped, misjudged, and paid the price for arrogance. Sarah's calm precision left no room for doubt. The security footage from the bar corroborated her story. By the end of the questioning, the officers shook their heads in quiet disbelief. There would be no charges against her. Word of the incident spread rapidly across the base. Texts, emails, whispered conversations in hallways. Did you hear about the female officer who took down 3 men in 10 seconds? By the next morning, every corner of the base was buzzing. Some didn't know her name. Few knew her face. But the story of her unmatched composure and lethal efficiency circulated like wildfire. Inside the base, reactions were mixed. Younger sailors, some fresh from training, were awestruck. They debated in quiet tones. How could one person subdue 3 grown men so effortlessly? Others, veterans of countless operations, simply nodded knowingly. They recognized the hallmarks of professional training, years of discipline, and experience under fire. Sarah Halley was becoming a legend, even to those who hadn't seen her in action before. Yet for Sarah, the attention was an unwelcome side effect. She didn't seek notoriety, nor did she care for it. For her, the incident was over in seconds, executed with precision and resolved. Fame was irrelevant. Control was everything. Still, she understood that the ripple effects of her actions would be felt far beyond that bar. Stories have a way of growing, especially on military bases, and she needed to ensure the truth remained intact. She had acted out of necessity, not ego. The contractors, on the other hand, were deeply shaken. In private conversations, their bravado evaporated, replaced by shame and awe. They had expected a fight they could dominate, an easy display of aggression, and instead faced a calm, controlled force they could neither predict nor counter. Some quietly admitted, later, that their perception of strength had been entirely flawed. It wasn't size, aggression, or bravado that won. It was discipline, control, and years of preparation. In the following days, Sarah's colleagues began teasing her privately, though always with admiration. A young lieutenant said under his breath, "You didn't just handle it. You dismantled them." Another veteran smirked, adding, "And did it without a single wasted movement." That's not luck. That's experience. For Sarah, these comments were acknowledgement enough. Recognition from peers, grounded in respect, mattered far more than public attention. The bar incident also triggered discussions among higher-ups. A few officers thought the story might be spun into positive PR. Female SEAL saves the day in bar fight, but Sarah refused. She declined interviews, refused media attention, and maintained that her story was not for public consumption. For her, the lesson was private, personal, and professional. Fame was a distraction. Discipline was the message. Yet even without her consent, the story spread. Videos, though few, captured blurred sequences of the incident. Patrons whispered about the woman who didn't flinch, didn't panic, and didn't escalate beyond necessity. Some wondered how someone so unassuming could command such power. Others, more experienced, immediately recognized her for what she was: a SEAL, trained to respond with precise efficiency under extreme conditions. Meanwhile, Sarah reflected privately on her own reactions during the incident. She wasn't angry at the contractors. In a strange sense, she felt pity. They were untrained, unprepared, and unaware of the consequences of misjudgment. Their aggression stemmed from arrogance, immaturity, and ignorance. The moment had reinforced a principle she lived by. True strength is measured not in the ability to strike, but in the ability to control yourself, while others lose control. Across the base, her colleagues debated the implications. Younger sailors marveled at her capability, and veteran instructors nodded with approval. Some even shared the story in training sessions, highlighting the importance of situational awareness, rapid threat assessment, and self-control under duress. Sarah had unwittingly created a teaching moment far broader than any one class, mission, or drill. Back at the bar, the contractors had been forced to reflect. The humiliation, bruises, and sudden realization of being outclassed left a permanent mark. One of them muttered privately to a friend, I never thought. I mean, she didn't even look like she could fight. It was a common misconception. Women, or seemingly ordinary people, are often underestimated. And that, Sarah knew, was the dangerous flaw most people fail to anticipate. By the end of the week, the story had spread beyond the base. Whispered accounts reached nearby towns, casual observers, and even local journalists. Every retelling emphasized her calm, surgical precision and the swift lesson delivered to three men who thought violence was a game. Yet the details that mattered most, her training, her years of preparation, her ethical restraint, remained largely unnoticed outside her professional circle. For Sarah, that was perfect. She had never sought recognition, and she never would. Her focus remained on her duties, her team, and the rigorous preparation that defined every decision she made. The incident at the Rusty Anchor was merely a reminder. Discipline and skill matter more than brute force or arrogance. That lesson, though unspoken, had been absorbed by every witness, and it would resonate far longer than the immediate impact. In the following days, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Her teammates joked privately about the bar fight that wasn't really a fight, yet the respect in their eyes was unmistakable. Sarah, meanwhile, resumed her rigorous routine. Physical training, tactical drills, and mission planning dominated her schedule. The incident was recorded in her mental ledger, a data point in a career defined by preparation and resilience. The contractors, however, remained subdued. Even after minor apologies and explanations, they avoided her gaze. Pride had been stripped away in seconds, replaced by the humbling understanding that assumptions can be deadly. And underestimating a trained professional is a lesson best learned in private reflection, and preferably without physical confrontation. That weekend, Sarah returned home quietly, reflecting on the lessons inherent in every confrontation she faced, whether on the battlefield or in a civilian bar. Every movement, every decision, and every action had consequences. Some consequences were immediate. Others, like respect earned or mistakes remembered, lingered for years. She understood that the story of the bar fight would follow her, but she didn't mind. Legends, after all, weren't built on bragging. They were built on silent acknowledgement and careful, deliberate mastery of skill and self-control. And as the sun rose over Norfolk Bay, glinting across the calm water, Sarah Hallad prepared for the week ahead, quietly confident that no challenge, no matter how unexpected, could shake the discipline, training, and composure that had just been witnessed, and that would continue to define her life in ways both seen and unseen. Sarah Hallad wasn't born with the calm precision or lethal efficiency that now defined her every action. Her journey began far from the neon lights of Norfolk or the chaos of a bar fight. She grew up in rural Montana, surrounded by vast stretches of mountains, rivers, and dense forests where survival wasn't a choice, it was a daily practice. Her father, a Vietnam veteran with weathered hands and a soft, commanding voice, taught her lessons that would echo through her life. From dawn, Sarah learned to track deer across frozen meadows, to read the subtle cues of the wind and terrain, to move silently, and to anticipate danger before it appeared. Strength isn't just muscle, her father would say. It's patience, observation, and the courage to act when the moment demands it. Those lessons, once framed in hunting and survival, became the foundation of a mindset that would later see her through Hell Week, combat missions, and situations where a single miscalculation could cost lives. At 18, Sarah left the quiet forest of Montana for the structured chaos of the United States Navy. She enlisted as a corpsman, knowing that her ambition was more than tending wounds. It was to operate on the front lines, to challenge herself physically and mentally in ways few dared. Her early days were a whirlwind of physical endurance tests, mental conditioning, and the unrelenting scrutiny of superiors, who expected nothing short of perfection. She faced skepticism at every turn. Male peers whispered doubts, instructors questioned her endurance, and some officers outright dismissed her potential. It would have been easy to crumble under the pressure, to accept the limits others tried to impose. But Sarah thrived in challenge. Every critique became fuel, every doubt a reason to push further. Failure wasn't an option. It was a permanent mark on a person's record. She adopted a mantra: pain is temporary. Failure is forever. The grueling Bud-S training for Navy SEALs was the next crucible. She faced conditions designed to break the human body and mind. Cold water immersion until hypothermia set in. Relentless runs across sand and rocky terrain. Hours without sleep, testing every aspect of endurance and resolve. Instructors pushed recruits to their absolute limits, pairing physical exertion with psychological torment. Every obstacle was an equation of skill, discipline, and resilience. Sarah failed some challenges on her first attempt. She lost footing, fell behind in formation, and faced the humiliation of publicly not measuring up. But she never gave up. On her second attempt, she endured Hell Week in its entirety, a grueling test of body and spirit that pushed recruits past exhaustion, injury, and self-doubt. Each day tested her endurance. Each night demanded resilience beyond the human norm. By the end, she had not only survived, but excelled, earning the recognition of instructors who once doubted her. Her training wasn't just physical. It was deeply psychological. She learned to anticipate threats, to remain calm under extreme stress, and to act with precision, even when the situation seemed chaotic. She studied human behavior, reading micro-expressions and predicting intentions, honing her ability to control confrontations before they escalated. Her mind became a weapon as sharp as her reflexes, and her body the instrument of her will. Combat experience cemented her reputation. Deployed to Afghanistan with a small SEAL unit, Sarah faced real threats where hesitation could mean death. Missions often required split-second decisions, navigating treacherous terrain, and confronting adversaries with lives hanging in the balance. She learned to operate in darkness, to communicate silently, and to make judgment calls with only fragments of information. Her calm under pressure became a hallmark, a skill that would later translate seamlessly to civilian situations, like the bar fight. One defining mission involved a high-value target in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Enemy fire pinned down her team, and her commanding officer was critically wounded. Sarah, without hesitation, lifted him and carried him hundreds of yards across jagged rocks under constant threat. She coordinated the team, neutralized threats, and executed the extraction flawlessly. The mission was successful. The team returned alive, and her professionalism saved lives. Despite her accomplishments, Sarah remained grounded. She refused unnecessary recognition, always redirecting praise to her team. She understood that leadership wasn't about accolades or attention. It was about responsibility, accountability, and ensuring the success of the mission above personal gain. Her reputation grew quietly, built on competence, humility, and unwavering discipline. Those who trained with her knew she was exceptional. Those who didn't would soon learn, often in unexpected ways. By the time she walked into the Rusty Anchor, she had carried years of training, experience, and quiet mastery with her. Her reactions in the bar weren't spontaneous. They were the culmination of a lifetime of preparation. Every movement was informed by survival lessons from childhood, physical conditioning from the Navy, psychological insight gained through combat, and an unshakable commitment to control. She didn't overreact. She didn't panic. She didn't seek retribution. She acted with efficiency and precision. Her calm in the face of aggression was a manifestation of countless hours spent learning that fear and impulse were the true enemies of survival. The contractors didn't understand it. They assumed anger or size determined outcomes. They were wrong. The real power came from a mind that measured, calculated, and executed without hesitation. In seconds, she turned potential disaster into a lesson in control, leaving witnesses stunned and her assailants humbled. Even the physical consequences of the encounter, a split lip, minor bruises, were insignificant compared to the psychological impact. Sarah understood that strength wasn't about punishing the weak. It was about maintaining dominance over oneself while others lost control. She carried that lesson in every operation, every training session, and every encounter, whether in a foreign combat zone or a local bar. By the end of the week, the base knew the story, and the legend quietly spread. Yet for Sarah, it remained a footnote in a life defined by discipline, service, and quiet excellence. She wasn't a hero in the public sense. She was a warrior by choice, a leader by example, and a professional by unwavering commitment to the principles she had internalized long before anyone ever recognized her. As she prepared for the next mission, the next training session, or the next unpredictable encounter, Sarah Hall carried within her the culmination of a lifetime's preparation. Every lesson learned from her father, every grueling drill, every mission completed under fire, had forged her into a person capable of responding calmly and decisively to the chaos that others could not. The bar incident was merely a demonstration of the warrior within, a glimpse into the life of someone who had trained for moments exactly like this, even if the world outside did not yet realize it. And in those quiet moments, looking out over the early morning Montana sunrise, or the calm waters near Norfolk, Sarah reflected on the principle that had guided her through every challenge. True strength was never in aggression or intimidation. It was in control, in preparation, and in the unwavering commitment to act decisively when the moment demanded it. That understanding, hard-earned and unshakable, defined the warrior within, a woman who could face any challenge in any environment and emerge in command. 2 years before the bar incident, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hall was deployed to the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, tasked with a mission that demanded absolute precision, calm under pressure, and leadership beyond her years. Her SEAL team had been tracking a high-value target for weeks, a regional insurgent, leader whose network had destabilized entire villages. Every step forward was measured, every sound a potential threat. In these mountains, a single misstep could cost lives. Night had fallen when the team received final coordinates for the target. The terrain was treacherous, jagged rocks, narrow passes, and icy winds whipping across exposed ridges. Visibility was near zero, but Sarah's mind was sharp, assessing the landscape, the enemy positions, and every possible contingency. Her team moved silently, weapons ready, each man and woman aware of the stakes. As they closed in on the compound, gunfire erupted. The team came under attack from hidden insurgents, some using preset traps and sniper positions. The night was alive with sound, bullets whistling, distant shouts, and the crunch of rock underfoot. In the chaos, Sarah's commanding officer was hit, his leg and shoulder pierced by enemy fire. He fell, immobilized, vulnerable. Without hesitation, Sarah acted. She assessed the situation in a fraction of a second. Who was down, which threats were imminent, and what could secure the team's success. Then, with a controlled calm, she lifted her commander onto her shoulders, his body heavy and unyielding, and began a grueling trek across the rocky slope. Bullets tore through the air around her, but her focus never wavered. She calculated each step, maintaining balance while shielding her commander and keeping an eye on enemy positions. Her team followed her lead, securing the perimeter and returning fire with precision. They moved in concert, each operator relying on the other, every movement rehearsed, but adapted to the unpredictable chaos of combat. Sarah's presence was magnetic, calm, confident, and commanding. Her teammates instinctively followed her lead, even under extreme stress, trusting her judgment completely. As they navigated the treacherous terrain, she shouted concise instructions, guiding the team over jagged rocks, around traps, and through narrow passes. Her mind functioned like a high-speed processor, calculating angles of fire, escape routes, and contingencies for the wounded. Every decision balanced risk and reward. There was no panic, no hesitation, only controlled, efficient action. After hundreds of yards that felt like miles, Sarah reached a small plateau that provided a relatively secure position. She gently laid her commander down, checked his vital signs, and coordinated a defensive perimeter while a teammate administered immediate medical aid. Even in the midst of danger, she maintained situational awareness, noting enemy positions, team fatigue, and potential reinforcements. The insurgents, realizing the team's tactical advantage, attempted to flank them. Sarah reacted instantly, directing suppressive fire and repositioning her team. Every movement was executed with precision. Bullets struck rock and earth, sparks flying as her team responded in perfect coordination. Under her guidance, they neutralized the threat and maintained control over the chaotic battlefield. Once the immediate danger subsided, Sarah orchestrated the extraction plan. Helicopters could only reach the area if the team secured a safe landing zone. She identified the only viable location, guided her team across the remaining treacherous terrain, and positioned them to cover the wounded and control the high ground. The extraction arrived just as the insurgents regrouped, and under Sarah's command, the team executed a flawless evacuation, bringing everyone home safely. After the mission, her commanding officer attempted to nominate her for a Silver Star. She refused publicly, insisting the success belonged to the team, not her. In her mind, every victory was collective, every failure personal. Recognition, accolades, and fame were irrelevant. The lives of her teammates, the mission's success, and operational discipline were paramount. This mission reinforced the lessons she had internalized since Montana. Leadership wasn't about ego or aggression. It was about preparation, observation, execution, and accountability. Every training exercise, every physical and mental trial, had prepared her for moments exactly like this. Calm under pressure, precise in execution, and strategic in thinking. These were the hallmarks of her effectiveness. Back on base, she briefed her superiors with meticulous attention to detail. Every variable, every contingency, and every tactical choice was documented, analyzed, and shared to improve future operations. Her reputation grew quietly, but undeniably. Among her peers, she was known as someone whose decisions under fire were flawless, whose presence inspired confidence, and whose leadership saved lives without theatrics or self-promotion. Months later, the incident at the Rusty Anchor would echo that same precision and control. In the bar, chaos erupted in seconds, and 3 men underestimated her skill. But the calm, decisive action she displayed was no different from the battlefield. The same principles, assessment, control, precision, and efficiency applied equally in combat or civilian life. Sarah herself reflected on the mission often, not out of pride, but to extract lessons. Every error, every delay, every moment of hesitation could have been catastrophic. She trained not only to react, but to anticipate, to internalize contingencies, and to maintain composure under extreme stress. This mindset had become second nature, automatic and reliable. Her SEAL instructors had often emphasized that the true measure of a warrior wasn't in accolades or media attention, but in consistent performance under pressure. Sarah exemplified that principle in every mission. She understood that leadership wasn't just about giving orders. It was about inspiring confidence, maintaining calm, and ensuring success under the harshest conditions. That Afghanistan mission cemented Sarah's philosophy. Preparation, discipline, and control were more important than raw strength. Every step in training, every hardship endured, and every decision under fire honed. A skill set that allowed her to act decisively and calmly in situations where most would panic. It was that same skill set, years later, that allowed her to handle the bar incident flawlessly. The physical confrontation was nothing like combat, yet the principles were identical. Rapid threat assessment, precise execution, and controlled dominance, these were universal. Her past missions had been harsher, the consequences deadlier, yet the clarity of mind and decisiveness she exhibited at the Rusty Anchor were direct extensions of her battlefield experience. Even now, reflecting on the mission, Sarah understood that her life was a series of interconnected lessons. Childhood survival in Montana taught patience and observation. Navy training forged endurance and resilience. Combat experience honed precision, judgment, and leadership. Every moment contributed to the ability to act decisively, whether carrying a wounded commander through gunfire or subduing 3 overconfident men in a bar. By the end of her deployment, Sarah Hawley was recognized quietly as one of the most capable and dependable operators in her unit. Her reputation was not built on stories or public attention. It was built on results, calm execution, and unwavering discipline. And in the civilian world, those same skills would manifest in unexpected ways, like a Friday night bar incident, leaving observers in awe and those who underestimated her humbled beyond words. As she returned to base after the mission, exhausted but composed, Sarah thought of her team, her training, and the countless hours spent preparing for exactly these moments. For her, every mission, every operation, every encounter was a test of control and mastery over self and environment. And it was in that mastery that her true power lay, silent, precise, and undeniable. By the time news of the bar incident reached the wider public, Sarah Hall had long since returned to her routine. She didn't seek fame, and she certainly didn't crave attention. But the story had a life of its own. Social media, military forums, and local news outlets buzzed with accounts of a woman who had subdued 3 grown men in seconds. Calm, efficient, and utterly composed. Videos, though few and blurry, circulated online, and the legend of the female Navy SEAL who didn't flinch grew overnight. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, some congratulatory, some curious, and some incredulous. Journalists and bloggers reached out, asking for interviews, pictures, and personal accounts. Officers from public affairs proposed feature articles. The headlines wrote themselves: Female SEAL floors 3 men in bar, or Calm woman leaves men on ground in seconds. But Sarah refused. Not subtly, not vaguely, outright refused. Her response was always the same. She declined interviews, declined photo requests, and politely but firmly communicated that her story was not for public consumption. The media frenzy irritated her, not because she disliked attention, but because it risked misrepresenting the truth. She had acted out of necessity, not ego. The narrative wasn't about drama or violence. It was about discipline, control, and the calm mastery that comes from years of training. Her superiors, however, recognized a different opportunity. The incident, though public, illustrated a rare combination of skill, composure, and real-world applicability. They reassigned Sarah to instruct new recruits in close quarters, defense, CQD, and situational awareness, the very skills she had demonstrated with lethal precision in the bar. The training center quickly became a proving ground for her abilities as an instructor. Young recruits, fresh from boot camp, had heard the whispers about the woman who dropped 3 men in 10 seconds. Some were skeptical, others intimidated. When Sarah entered the training room, uniform crisp, gaze steady, and posture commanding, the skepticism evaporated. She didn't shout or intimidate. She didn't raise her voice. She simply moved with purpose, and her presence alone conveyed authority. Her demonstrations were flawless. Every movement precise, every explanation clear. She emphasized control over brute force, awareness over reaction, and decisiveness over hesitation. Recruits quickly learned that Sarah's methods were unforgiving, but fair. She corrected mistakes instantly, demonstrating the consequences of inattention or arrogance. No student escaped unchallenged, and no lesson went uningrained. Even the recruits who doubted her initially were forced to reconsider. One trainee, a particularly cocky young sailor, smirked during his first sparring match, assuming he could overpower her. Within moments, he found himself pinned, movement neutralized, and dignity humbled. Sarah didn't gloat. She simply adjusted his stance, explained the error, and moved on to the next lesson. The lesson, however, lingered far longer than the correction. Precision, control, and calm were far more powerful than aggression. Veteran instructors quietly observed, impressed. Sarah's effectiveness wasn't just technical. It was psychological. She taught more than combat or tactics. She taught mindset. Awareness, patience, discipline, and respect for skill were embedded in every exercise. She emphasized that strength was not about domination, but mastery over self. These lessons resonated deeply with both recruits and instructors alike, and her influence began to shape a new generation of operators. Meanwhile, the contractors from the bar, the men she had subdued, were quietly reassigned to a training session led by Sarah. When they realized who would be instructing them, panic and embarrassment set in immediately. They froze the moment she entered the room, uniform perfect, gaze unwavering, and calm radiating from every movement. There was no anger, no personal vendetta, just instruction. But the implicit message was clear. Respect and attentiveness were mandatory. The training began. Sarah demonstrated techniques with the same efficiency she had used in the bar and in Afghanistan. Every strike, every hold, every movement was precise and controlled. Her former assailants attempted to follow along, but their movements betrayed hesitation, awkwardness, and residual fear. She corrected them instantly, physically adjusting their posture, guiding their grip, and explaining the importance of anticipation, control, and calm. At the end of the session, one of the men approached her quietly. His voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I was wrong." Sarah didn't respond with words. She simply nodded, signaling acknowledgement. The lesson had been learned. Strength without control was meaningless, and underestimating someone, especially a professional, was a mistake with consequences. In the broader Navy community, Sarah's story spread quietly but powerfully. Other units shared her teaching methods, emphasizing the same principles she had demonstrated: composure, awareness, precision, and leadership through example. She became a model not for fame or heroism, but for professionalism, discipline, and capability under pressure. Despite the attention, Sarah remained grounded. She focused on her trainees, ensuring that each one left her sessions not only technically proficient, but mentally prepared. Her life was defined by responsibility to her team, her mission, and herself. The bar incident, the headlines, the whispers, all were distractions. For Sarah, the true measure of her actions lay in results, not recognition. Her colleagues, however, privately celebrated her accomplishments. Chief Torres, a veteran instructor, told recruits about the incident, emphasizing not the drama, but the lesson. If you ever think you've got her figured out, step on her mat. You'll learn fast that arrogance is a liability and control is everything. Recruits learned quickly that Sarah's reputation wasn't just stories, it was reality. At home, Sarah reflected on the unintended fame with quiet resignation. She didn't desire admiration, but she understood its inevitability. In every situation, she carried the responsibility of representing the Navy, the SEALs, and the principles that had defined her life: discipline, preparation, and control. Public attention was a side effect of excellence, not a goal. The media tried repeatedly to get interviews, but Sarah's consistent response was simple. She declined. Articles ran, rumors spread, videos circulated, but her focus never wavered. Her reputation, after all, was built on action, not words. She had never fought for glory, and she never would. Over time, the story evolved into a legend among recruits and colleagues alike. Tales of her precision, calm, and efficiency were shared around training centers and bases. New recruits, having heard the stories, approached training with respect, attentiveness, and a keen awareness that discipline and skill mattered more than bravado. The lessons Sarah had demonstrated in seconds at the bar had echoed far beyond that moment, becoming a teaching tool that influenced an entire generation of operators. Even years later, those who had witnessed the incident would recount it not for shock value, but for its clarity in illustrating the principles of professionalism, skill, and control. Sarah's quiet approach to fame ensured that the story retained its essence. It wasn't about violence, ego, or spectacle. It was about mastery, preparation, and composure. And so, while the world debated and speculated, Sarah Hawley continued her life with the same unwavering focus. She trained, led, and guided others. She applied the same principles that had kept her alive in combat, the same calm precision that had subdued 3 men in a bar, and the same discipline that had defined her life since Montana. Fame, headlines, and whispers were irrelevant. Purpose, control, and excellence were everything. Months after the infamous bar incident, the ripples of that night continued to be felt throughout the base. Sarah Hawley had returned to her duties as instructor, quietly guiding new recruits and shaping future operators with the same discipline and precision that had defined her career. Yet in quiet corners of the base, and in the private conversations of those directly involved, the story of her calm, decisive action lingered, a lesson far deeper than any bruises or embarrassment. The 3 contractors she had subdued that night were still assigned to training sessions under her supervision. The initial tension was palpable. They avoided eye contact, hesitated in drills, and exhibited a level of caution rarely seen among professionals. It wasn't fear in the cowardly sense. It was respect, earned through first-hand experience. They had underestimated her once, and would never make that mistake again. Sarah, however, did not treat them with vindictiveness. She approached every session with professional detachment, focusing on instruction, not punishment. She emphasized situational awareness, reaction time, and control, the same principles she had applied in both the bar and in combat. Her methods were exacting, but fair. Mistakes were corrected immediately, but they were teaching moments, not humiliation. The contractors, initially defensive, slowly began to adapt. They realized that Sarah's authority was rooted not in aggression, but in mastery. Every correction, every demonstration, and every lecture underscored a fundamental truth: skill, discipline, and preparation always outweigh arrogance, size, or brute force. The men began to listen, to observe, and to learn. Their previous arrogance melted away in the presence of someone who had earned respect through action rather than words. During one particularly grueling session, a senior instructor challenged Sarah to a demonstration with the 3 men. She obliged, her movements fluid and precise, neutralizing attacks with efficiency and control. The contractors attempted resistance, but each effort was met with calm adjustment and explanation. By the end of the drill, they were exhausted, humbled, and most importantly, enlightened. They had not been defeated by rage or ego. They had been outclassed by preparation, discipline, and experience. Off the training floor, subtle changes became evident. The men spoke of their experience in hushed tones, acknowledging that Sarah had taught them more in a single session than they had learned in years of casual arrogance. They began to model their behavior, showing more attention, respect, and focus during exercises. Their transformation was quiet but profound. The lesson of the bar and Sarah's calm mastery had lasting impact. Meanwhile, the base community at large began to understand the larger significance of her actions. Younger recruits who had heard the story learned a valuable lesson about humility, focus, and the true measure of skill. They realized that power without control is meaningless, and arrogance can lead to swift, undeniable consequences. For many, the tale of that night became more than an anecdote. It was a cornerstone of training philosophy, discussed in briefing rooms, classrooms, and casual conversations alike. Sarah herself never needed to speak about it. Her presence was enough to reinforce the lesson. Observation, calm, and precision were tools that transcended circumstance. Students and colleagues alike witnessed her in action and internalized the principle without a single word of admonishment. She had turned what could have been a fleeting incident into a permanent, practical teaching moment. The three contractors, now fully integrated into the training environment, began to demonstrate noticeable growth. They approached each exercise with focus, carefully following instructions, and displaying a newfound respect for both her and the process. The transformation was striking. What had once been arrogance and recklessness became diligence and humility. Sarah observed quietly, her expression unchanged, content to let their growth speak for itself. One day, during a complex tactical simulation, the contractors executed a maneuver flawlessly, a movement Sarah had emphasized repeatedly during prior sessions. She nodded subtly, acknowledging their competence without fanfare. No words of praise were needed. The acknowledgement was silent, internal, and entirely earned. The lesson had come full circle. Respect, discipline, and preparation had replaced recklessness and arrogance. In the months following the bar incident, Sarah's story also inspired a broader cultural shift within the unit. Instructors emphasized awareness, precision, and restraint in every aspect of training. Recruits learned that dominance was not demonstrated through aggression or bluster, but through careful observation, calculated action, and controlled execution. The principles Sarah embodied became ingrained in daily practice, reinforcing the values that had guided her throughout her career. Yet the personal impact on the contractors was perhaps the most profound. One evening, in a rare moment of honesty, one of the men approached Sarah privately. "Ma'am, I finally understand. I thought it was about strength. I was wrong. It's about control. It's about awareness. Thank you for showing me that." Sarah did not respond with praise or condescension. She nodded once, acknowledging both his admission and growth. The moment was brief, but transformative, a quiet culmination of a lesson that had begun with an elbow, a calm stance, and seconds of decisive action. That acknowledgement rippled through the unit. Others observed the interaction and internalized the same lesson. Humility, attentiveness, and respect were as important as skill and strength. Sarah had not only neutralized aggression, she had instilled a culture of self-awareness and disciplined mastery that would outlast any single mission, incident, or headline. Even as time passed, the story of that night remained alive in discussions, exercises, and casual conversations. New recruits asked about it, older members shared it as an example, and instructors referenced it as a teaching tool. Yet for Sarah, the lesson was simple and personal. Every encounter is an opportunity to demonstrate control, and every lesson is an opportunity to cultivate respect. The contractors themselves continued to improve, both in skill and attitude. They no longer approached exercises with arrogance or haste. They observed, anticipated, and executed with precision, embodying the principles that Sarah had silently demonstrated in those seconds of chaos. Their growth, quiet but undeniable, was a testament to the lasting impact of controlled mastery over brute aggression. Even outside the training environment, Sarah noticed subtle changes in interactions. Recruits and colleagues exhibited increased professionalism, careful observation, and thoughtful response in situations that previously might have escalated unnecessarily. The ripple effects of her actions, calm, precise, and disciplined, extended beyond immediate instruction, fostering a culture of awareness, respect, and measured action across the base. And in quiet moments, Sarah reflected on the sequence of events that had led to this lasting impact. From Montana's rugged wilderness to the training grounds of the Navy SEALs, from the battlefield in Afghanistan to a crowded civilian bar, every experience had contributed to her ability to act decisively, maintain control, and teach others without ego. The incident was more than a confrontation. It was a demonstration of principles honed over a lifetime. By the time the year ended, the bar incident had become legend within the base, not as a sensational story, but as a foundational lesson in respect, skill, and discipline. The contractors had transformed, the recruits had learned, and Sarah had quietly reinforced the timeless truth. True strength is measured not by how hard you strike, but by how well you control yourself while others lose control. The lesson lasted because it was lived, not told. Every adjustment, every correction, every moment of silent mastery embedded itself in the minds and habits of those who had witnessed or participated. And for Sarah Hawley, that was the true measure of success, a legacy of calm precision, skillful leadership, and unwavering discipline, ensuring that the principles she lived by would continue long after the incident had faded from public memory. The months and years that followed the infamous bar incident solidified Sarah Hale's reputation, not as a public figure, but as a quiet force of respect, precision, and discipline. Her career continued, each day defined by preparation, training, and leadership. The story of the night 3 men had underestimated her became more than a tale of confrontation. It became a lesson in mastery that resonated across the base and beyond. Sarah never sought recognition, but the influence of her actions spread quietly, shaping the culture around her. New recruits, veterans, and instructors alike referenced the incident in discussions, exercises, and debriefs, not to celebrate violence, but to underscore the importance of control, awareness, and skill. The principles she demonstrated in seconds that night were now embedded in the mindset of countless operators, quietly redefining the standard for professionalism and leadership. Even the contractors she had subdued became living examples of transformation. They approached training with humility and focus, acknowledging that discipline and preparation always outmatched arrogance. Their initial embarrassment faded into respect, and in private moments, they would admit that Sarah had taught them lessons they would carry for the rest of their careers. The incident had humbled them, but it had also elevated them, illustrating that growth often comes from confronting someone who embodies excellence. Sarah's daily routine remained rigorous. Early mornings were dedicated to physical training, runs along the waterfront, endurance drills, and weight training. Afternoons focused on instruction, where she meticulously guided recruits through tactical exercises, CQD techniques, and situational awareness scenarios. Every interaction was purposeful, every correction intentional. She measured not only skill but mindset, teaching operators that discipline, observation, and composure were as critical as strength and technique. Her reputation extended quietly to higher command. Leaders recognized her as an invaluable asset, not just for her battlefield expertise, but for her ability to instill respect, control, and professionalism in those under her guidance. In meetings, her opinions were valued, not because of notoriety, but because of consistent, demonstrable results. She had become the benchmark for operational excellence, a standard others aspired to reach. Outside the base, The story of Sarah Hawley occasionally surfaced in media, online forums, and military publications. The headlines continued to emphasize the spectacle, the female SEAL who floored 3 men in seconds. Yet those who truly understood her actions knew the real story. It wasn't about aggression or bravado. It was about preparation, mastery, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. Sarah remained undistracted by the fame, focusing instead on the work that mattered: training, leadership, and personal excellence. Her experiences also shaped her approach to mentorship. Sarah invested time in guiding operators beyond technical skill, teaching them the value of humility, patience, and foresight. She emphasized that mistakes often came not from lack of ability, but from arrogance, distraction, or lack of preparation. By sharing lessons drawn from her life, from Montana's wilderness to combat zones, she illustrated that discipline and control were lifelong practices, not temporary tactics. In private moments, Sarah reflected on the interconnectedness of her experiences. The lessons from her childhood, observation, patience, and quiet strength had prepared her for the challenges of the SEALs. Her battlefield experience had honed decisiveness, leadership, and tactical awareness. And the bar incident had crystallized these skills in a civilian setting, proving that the principles of mastery applied everywhere. She understood that each moment of her life, each choice, each discipline reinforced the others, creating a holistic approach to leadership and life. Years later, when asked about her most memorable experiences, Sarah rarely spoke of combat or medals. Instead, she referenced moments of quiet discipline, times when preparation, awareness, and calm decisiveness made the difference between failure and success. The bar incident, often sensationalized by outsiders, was for her a practical demonstration of everything she had learned: patience, precision, and control. It was a small-scale echo of the same principles that saved lives in war zones and guided missions across the globe. The base community, meanwhile, continued to evolve. Instructors and trainees internalized Sarah's approach to conflict and leadership. Situational awareness exercises became a staple of training, emphasizing control over aggression and observation over reaction. Stories of her calm decisiveness were shared as teaching tools, illustrating that discipline, not strength, determined outcomes. Her legacy was becoming systemic, quietly reshaping the culture of the unit. Even the contractors, long since humbled, carried the lessons forward. They approached assignments, training, and operations with a heightened sense of awareness and respect. In moments of potential arrogance or overconfidence, they would remember the woman who had neutralized them effortlessly and adjust their behavior accordingly. The incident had become a touchstone, a lesson in humility and professional excellence. For Sarah, the enduring impact of that night was less about reputation and more about principle. She had demonstrated, through calm action and disciplined execution, that mastery and preparation always outclassed aggression and overconfidence. The story's permanence wasn't in headlines or social media. It was in the lasting lessons internalized by those who witnessed her actions and absorbed the principles behind them. In her final years of active duty, Sarah Hawley was quietly recognized for her contributions. She received commendations for leadership, training excellence, and operational performance, but she viewed these honors as secondary. For her, the true measure of success lay in the people she had guided, the lessons she had instilled, and the culture of respect and discipline she had nurtured. She had created a legacy not of fame, but of excellence that would outlast any single incident or headline. And when she finally retired, she left the base not with fanfare, but with quiet acknowledgement from colleagues, recruits, and those who had trained under her. The lessons she had embodied, the discipline she had modeled, and the calm decisiveness she had demonstrated would continue to influence operators long after her departure. The story of the bar incident, sensationalized or not, had become part of that legacy, a reminder that respect, preparation, and self-control were the true measures of strength. In the end, Sarah Hale's life reflected a simple but profound principle. True power lies not in the ability to strike, but in the ability to act decisively, maintain composure, and guide others through example. Every decision, every action, and every lesson reinforced that truth. She had lived it in Montana, proven it in combat, and demonstrated it in seconds that changed the course of a casual Friday night. Her legacy endured quietly, like the calm before a storm, shaping the mindset of those who followed. New recruits learned not from stories alone, but from the culture she cultivated, a culture that valued awareness, respect, and discipline above all. Those who had underestimated her learned humility, those who had trained with her learned precision, and those who had observed her influence carried lessons that would ripple outward indefinitely. Sarah Hale had never sought fame, notoriety, or headlines. Yet in her own way, she had created a legend, not of sensational violence, but of mastery, discipline, and enduring influence. And in the quiet moments, far from public attention, she remained exactly what she had always been, a professional, a warrior, and a teacher of lessons that would last far beyond any single encounter. The story of that night, the elbow, the calm, the controlled dominance would be remembered, yes, but only as a symbol. The real story, the lasting lesson, was the demonstration of self-mastery, preparation, and the quiet, unwavering authority of someone who had dedicated her life to excellence. That, ultimately, was Sarah Hale's legacy, timeless, understated, and undeniable.